What we've got today is a TJ Magna 3.5 litre 2000 model. It's got what appears to be an ignition fault. There's a miss, there's at least one cylinder down, so I've got the G-scan with me at the moment, so we'll go through a little diagnostic process, see what the codes read out and see if we can make an informed diagnosis on that. Check engine light is flashing at the moment, which means that it's communicating with the scan tool, so that's a good sign. We are looking for a system search, so we'll do a full system search and we'll OK that. Ignition on, ignition is on, so we're fine there. We'll just see how we go. No diagnostic trouble, fault codes found. Now we're going to do an activation test and a cylinder balance test. So to do that we need to start the car, then through the activation test we can cut each cylinder and isolate which cylinder or cylinders are at fault. So you can probably hear that it's running quite rough and there's a cylinder missing. So let's go to our activation test and see if we can break it down. So there's our number one injector. We're now going to cut that injector. Start. And notice that it's got worse, so obviously number one cylinder is working okay. Let's go to number three. I can't hear much of a difference there at all. It seems very, very similar. It's still testing. It's just finished its test and I couldn't notice any variation in the RPM. So we'll get under the bonnet and have a look. Alright, so we're under the bonnet now. V6 configuration, 3.5 litre. Now what we did before was just have a quick look at the plug leads. Now with this deep reach style of plug lead, they tend to crack around the plastic here, the Bakelite plastic. We've checked the front three and they appear to be okay at this point in time. This is a distributor style, as I mentioned before, and our distributor is hidden all the way down in there. So a lot of work to do there, but in all their wisdom, thank you very much Mr. Mitsubishi, got it out. The inlet manifold's going to have to come off to get to those back ones, and that typically will be the fault, simply because most people when they service their vehicle they think, oh well, it's too hard to do that lot, they'll be platinum anyway so I won't worry about it. And then you end up, oh, it's 100,000 later, oh, it's 150,000, oh, it's 200,000 later, still on the original spark plugs on the back bank. So typically those will be the faulty ones. So we'll check that out now. Okay, so we've got our inlet manifold off, and now we've got access to those. Nice bit of thunder and lightning in the background there. We might just stick under the bonnet here, I think. So we've got access to our rear plug leads now. I haven't pulled them off as yet, so it'll be interesting to see if these have been replaced at any stage or if they're the originals. As I said, they generally leave them like that because it's too much effort to pull them off. So we shall hopefully get these out and make the leads quite short, and we'll have a look now at the leads themselves, make sure there's no cracks down them. But it's quite possible that it could just be a set of spark plugs. There appear to be, it appears okay with that one. We'll check out this one. No, that doesn't look too bad. I'll clean them up with a rag and have a good look. There appears, if you have a look on the end of that one there, even that next one next to it, you notice the colour? So we've got brown, but we've also got little shades of grey. Particularly in this one, if we have a real close look, if you can just have a look at that one there, you can see that little grey line there. Now to me that's a spark line, which indicates that it's not going through the spark plug, but rather off to the cylinder block or the cylinder head. So yeah, you can just see it there. And so to me that's an indication that when we pull that out we'll find that a spark plug is shorted out or had it or whatever the case may be. So we shall continue on ever onward and see how we go. So I've just loosened up all the spark plugs. I haven't pulled any out at the moment. One thing to keep in mind is make sure that all your plug leads, if you intend cranking the engine, are far away from the inlet manifold. You wouldn't want any backfire to occur because of that, so be careful. It's also important, if you're going to do any cranking, to perhaps disable the ignition system by pulling a fuse or whatever the case may be. Even your wiring to your distributor will kill any ignition. Some of these spark plugs that have the deep style plug leads are very, very difficult to get out, and if your socket, I think we're getting hail now, yes we're getting hail, so enjoy. If your socket doesn't have the little rubber thing in there, you'll never get it out. So one trick is to, when you get a set of plug leads like this, just cut the end off, keep the end, and then you simply use that to get your spark plug out. That's the theory behind it anyway. It's in there somewhere. Make a lower of it. There we go. Voila, one spark plug. Alright, so what we're going to do is pull them all out, but it's important to keep them in order so that we can figure out which ones are faulty and which cylinder is faulty. These plugs haven't been replaced in quite some time, not even the front ones. So I can imagine what the back ones are going to look like. They should be platinums in the rear, which they're not, they're just standard. Oh, hang on, is that a platinum? Yes, it is a platinum, but it's mighty hot, I can tell you that much. And we're getting very wet here, so all my tools. Okay, so those plugs are absolutely had it. And interesting, as I mentioned before, that on those back ones, just have a look at the, we just lay them out here, ouch, still hot. You can see all the rust, etc. around the edges here, and that's where water has accumulated. And this one in particular, notice the colour difference between this one and this one. I'll just get my not so much waterproof lead light now. You can clearly see that this is grey. That's an indication that it's been shorting out. So if we have a look, you can see that. You'll find, and notice there's grey in there as well. These ones are brown, that's mainly because of rust, but this fella here has turned grey because you're getting arcing across between there and the cylinder head. So if we were to have a look down the cylinder head, you'd most likely find little arc marks across to the cylinder head. Plugs are absolutely had it, we'll do those, but then we'll check the plug leads as well as the distributor cap next if we don't get flooded out. So as you can see, it's lovely weather here in Goulburn. Hail sitting everywhere. We just heard a massive lightning thunderclap before, pretty close. Anyway, I suppose we should do some work. You only live once in a lightning storm. So I'll just try and pull that off, hopefully. If I can push all the hail to one side. Okay, let's have a look at what we got here. Well, that's interesting. It's not actually too bad. I've seen worse. Carbon brush doesn't actually look too bad. Although, did you notice all the carbon coming off, all the dust coming off there? So the carbon is actually worn. As you can see, there might be a poor contact in the back of the carbon brush. There's a spring there that pushes it down. So a lot of the carbon might have been arcing inside there. So it's possible that it might be a good idea to replace the distributor cap. We'll make a decision when we check all the plug leads. At this point in time, to really fix the problem, it might be an idea to replace the spark plugs, the plug leads, the distributor cap and the rotor button. I can see the owner who is filming this at this stage. He just had a heart attack. He grabbed his chest, but I think he'll be fine. So anyway, we'll look a bit further. So now we're going to check our plug leads. How do we do that? With this particular style, with these deep socket or deep spark plug leads, they're actually quite hard to, get your plug lead, your multimeter lead down in there. So what I've done is made up a bit of brass here, and I've soldered on a couple of spark plug tops on either end, which is very helpful. So all you do is you stick that down in the guts of it, like so. Make sure you've got a good connection. Then you need to turn your multimeter to resistance. And yes, we know that resistance is useless. Heard it all before. Okay, so now we need to figure out which plug lead this is. You can do a quick trip by going around and finding out. Oh, I think I've got the first one. Check it out. So 5.74 kilo ohms is quite acceptable. It's meant to be about 8 to 12 kilo ohms per, used to be foot, but you know, roughly 300 mil. So that's quite acceptable for that length. We'll go on to our next one. 1, 2, 3, our long one. Who's next? Not that one. Alright, so there's our next one. Oops. 6.34. Why is it a greater resistance reading than the other two? Well, resistance is increased by length. That's the longest plug lead compared to the other two. Therefore, the resistance goes up, but it's still within our range of 8 to 12 kilo ohms per 300 mil. Now, we knew it was an ignition fault. We knew that it was at least one cylinder, and you'll find that that cylinder will be 1, 2, 3. There you go. So there's our firing order on this particular model. Number 1 will be at the front, because you start at the front, then it goes number 1, number 2, number 3. So remember, if we go back to our when we did our balance test, we said yes, number 3 has definitely got a fault, and there is our fault right there. Wherever it is, I've put the plug down somewhere. I can't find it now. How silly is that? There it is. Yeah. So there's our clear fault. We can see the grey track mark. So this is a really good idea, or a good example of the type of faults that you'll find when there is tracking involved. This was a back spark plug, as I mentioned before, and what happens is, this is a platinum one. Yes, they don't last forever. You've got platinum, you've got iridium, you've got yttrium, you've got all sorts of spark plugs, but they don't last forever. They're just service items like everyone else, or every other component, like your air filter, fuel filter, oxygen sensor. For crying out loud, put in the effort and replace these back spark plugs. Platinums, in theory, should last around about 100,000 kilometres, but most technicians nowadays are replacing them at 80,000 kilometres, so that your customer doesn't end up with this sort of problem. Okay, so guys, whatever you do, put in the effort. I know it's extra effort and extra cost to the customer, but at least you know that your customer will be happy with the decent service and the decent quality of service that you provide for them. Okay, so replace those back spark plugs. So we're back on the Magna again. Fortunately, it's beautiful and sunny outside, which is fantastic. Excuse the road noise. So we solved the issue with number 3 spark plug, but unfortunately, either it's a crook plug lead or spark plug, the platinum spark plug, which is faulty, which is unfortunately nothing to do with us. But I've got to isolate that now. I've been able to ascertain that it's number 5, because I've done another balance test on it, and number 5 makes no difference. It's just making no difference in the RPM change. So unfortunately, it's not one of the front cylinders, of course. It's one of the back ones, so the inlet manifold's got to come off again. So just bear with me and we'll see how we go. Got the inlet manifold off. I can't see any issues with the gasket that may have been done wrong. So now we know that it's number 5. Number 5 is this one here. So we'll pull that plug lead off, have a look at it there. Can't see anything visual. So first of all, we'll just pop that spark plug out and have a quick look at it. Although I haven't got my glasses on at the moment, I can't see any obvious cracking there, no tracking, nothing like that. So I'll have a look at the plug lead next. Finally figured out the issue. A bit of a curly one, I must admit. I checked the spark plug, as I mentioned, couldn't fault it. There doesn't appear to be anything wrong with it. I will test that in another cylinder later on, just to make sure that it's okay. Put that aside for now. But I did a resistance check on the plug lead. Fine, it was 3 kilo ohm. Fine, not an issue. I thought, well, am I going mad, or is it something a little more curly than expected? So I did, as I was doing my resistance check, as I mentioned, I used this little tool that I've made up, and as I pushed it down, I realised it actually went down quite far. So I thought I'd compare it with another one. So as you can see, it goes down to that depth, so that's the depth there. If I get it on another plug lead, it goes down that far. So you can see it's been a faulty manufacture. The plug lead itself, the connector, they haven't put it in a deep reach one, and it's actually come up the top here as opposed to being further down here where it just sits on the spark plug. So in theory, the spark plug should just fit into there. And of course you can't get a proper feel for it because the rubber grabs on top of the top of the spark plug, but also this boot here seals across the head as well, so you wouldn't be able to get a proper feel for it, how it happens. But that's the issue. That's the reason that we're missing on number 5 cylinder. So now it's all back together. Spark plug is the original spark plug, but it checks out okay. The plug lead has been replaced. It was faulty. I showed you what was wrong with it. Inlet manifold is back on. Hoses, airflow meter, everything's back together. So fingers crossed, we got this sorted. Just bear with me. I'll go out and fire up the beast. Pretty cool. Okay, sounds nice and smooth. We've got rid of that. Just a quick recap. We were able to use the scan tool to do a balance test on it. There were no codes that were stored, so doing a balance test isolated that originally it was number 3. We pulled off the inlet manifold the first time, did all the spark plugs and all the plug leads. Fine. Problem solved? No. Started up again. It's cylinder miss. Balance test again via the scan tool. Proved number 5 was the issue this time. Pulled off the inlet manifold a second time and found that the plug lead on number 5 had been manufactured wrong, incorrect. Where the terminal was too far up, therefore it was causing a miss on number 5. So it's all done, it's all good, customer's happy, awesome. With this second time around in particular, it would have been quite easy to get carried away with looking at complex issues, especially when it was only the depth of the plug lead that was faulty. So it's important that you keep complex things simple.